Hello. Today I will be talking about the International Monetary Fund, what it is and why it matters. For many, the International Monetary Fund tends to be an important but far-off financial agency that enters the scene as and when the economies of participating nations face financial shortages. Inferring from the name, the IMF appears to be an agency far removed, both literally and figuratively, and therefore of no major interest except to economists. On the contrary, an examination of the IMF reveals the significant impact it creates on the global and national levels, as well as the well-being of the masses, even as it creates an arena for discussions on justice, influence, and the distribution of benefits for the participating nations. Insight into the IMF makes it clear that the global economy, and specifically the individual economy, appears to be an intertwined whole, where the trickle created by one economy creates significant rippling effects elsewhere. The IMF was founded back in 1944 during the Bretton Woods Conference, which took place during the latter stages of the World War II in the state of New Hampshire. An international conference had been called for the benefit of leaders across the world, their intention being the creation of an international financial system that would ensure the prevention of global financial disruptions that led to global turmoil during the past, causing World War II. As interpreted by the IMF's history, it was founded for the purpose of promoting international monetary cooperation, financial stability, world trade, and the reduction of poverty across the world, as stated by the IMF history. In simpler terms, the IMF was founded as an economic safety net that would help prevent global financial disasters. The most obvious method for thinking about the modern-day role of the IMF would be that of a global financial firefighter. In the aftermath of major financial problems such as hyperinflation, the collapse of currencies, and unmanageable national debt, the IMF provides financial firefighting services in the form of emergency loans. For example, if the economy of one country faces problems like the collapse of their currencies, international banks start to panic, and investors begin to back out. The IMF tries to prevent such matters from gaining global proportions. Nevertheless, the funds provided by the IMF are not unconditionally applied. This requires that the nations benefiting from the loans implement policy reforms, which are widely referred to as conditionality. This would involve cuts in government spending, incrementing tax revenues, interest rates, privatization of some firms, and redesigning social programs. In the viewpoint of the IMF, the reforms are remedial and focus on the underlying causes for the instabilities experienced. In their perspective, nations would have to implement effective long-run policies as opposed to short-run fixes for recovery. Although such provisions are aimed at ensuring the stabilization process, it is exactly that, and it makes up the central debate concerning the IMF. Critics state that the mandatory stabilization packages often prove harmful to the people by cutting funds for basic services such as education, healthcare, and social services. Economist Joseph Stiglitz, one of the leading opponents of the IMF, argues that the model can exacerbate poverty and undermine democratic decision-making by imposing the same policy on the entire world. Another major material criticism that can be directed against the IMF revolves around the voting power of the IMF's members. This is where rich countries are accorded more voting power than the rest. For example, the United States, which is the largest shareholder of the IMF, is automatically the country that carries the most significant voice in the operations. This raises the question of whether the IMF fairly represents all of its members. On the other hand, there exists a considerable number of policymakers and economists who believe that without the IMF, the severity of global financial crises would increase significantly. This kind of spillover effect occurs as the global economy collapses. The IMF, therefore, appears to play an important role regarding the prevention of global financial disasters. In addition, the IMF assists the global community in the dissemination of global data and the development of government officials, which enhances the capabilities of nations to manage their economy. This appears despite the criticism that the IMF receives, which perceives it as unnecessary. Another significant point to highlight here is the significant development and transformation that the IMF has undergone over the years. In the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the IMF's policy framework had a focus on strict terms and often supported the rapid privatization of services, as well as the reduction of government spending. In the aftermath of the criticism that gathered steam, culminating the Asian financial crisis, the IMF shifted the focus of their policies. In the comparatively newer eras, there has been an increasing focus on the underlying aspects of inequalities, provisions for the social welfare of the masses, as well as their vulnerability to climate-related financial risks. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis, the IMF has shown unprecedented levels of financial support, as well as an emphasis on the maintenance of social spending, contrary to their original policy focus. After my assessment of the International Monetary Fund, It appears that the organization, despite some of the challenges it faces, remains indispensable. On the one hand, the global economy and the economies of nations would be prone to instability if there were no central entity that could react during emergencies. The IMF helps alleviate financial problems, restore confidence of the markets, and aid economies during their rebuilding process. On the other hand, the IMF faces the challenge of ensuring that the technical solutions it provides align with the impacts of such solutions that would create for the people. My argument would be that the IMF, despite the various challenges it experiences, must continue focusing on the development of policies that ensure the well-being of people living in the economies that face problems. At the same time, it would be significant to focus on the stability of the economy. Thank you.